Welcome back, everybody. I hope you all got in a good stretch, and really important that you all are staying hydrated and have some good snacks to keep the energy up during the next couple of days. As you can see from the last video, we have come a long way with equity on the mall, and we have still have so much more work to do to make sure that we are, again, fulfilling the vision that we have of a healthier, more equitable San Joaquin Valley. As we mentioned, equity on the mall and the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund would not exist without our community partners and our engaged residents of the San Joaquin Valley. And so now it's our opportunity to be able to share with you the wonderful, beautiful, and empowering work that our community partners are doing with all of the residents in San Joaquin Valley to fulfill that vision of a healthier and more equitable San Joaquin Valley. So to kick off our IHEAL policy platform presentations, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our education subcommittee presenting an overview of the issues facing San Joaquin Valley students. Education Committee, take it away. Hey, Erica, how you doing? Deep, how you doing?
Doing great. Great to be with you all.
Great. So I'm going to turn it over to you all for the presentation.
So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, San Joaquin Valley and those gathering near and wide or across Zoom, as we often are, for Equity on the Mall. My name is Nandeep Singh, and I'm the chair of the Education Subcommittee and the executive director of the Chicano Movement. I'm delighted to be with you here this morning as we celebrate and uplift the work of so many in the San Joaquin Valley that are challenging the status quo, and as we attempt to build a collective together to create a region where we can all thrive. In this conversation, I wanted to share some thoughts of my own as the chair, as a person who has been an educator, a director of a nonprofit engaged in educational justice, and one who has gained some additional insights about internal processes from being a school board trustee in Fresno County. And then I'm going to really turn it over to my esteemed colleagues and panelists who are going to really go in depth in some key topics. The pandemic has exacerbated and brought to light many inequities that those on the front line have been sounding alarm bells for decades. What is new is the investments that the state of California, the legislature, and the governor are making to chip away at the educational investment gap across the state. However, there are challenges ahead that is going to require bold leadership and a commitment towards keeping the California dream alive. In the educational realm, while the news from Sacramento has been very positive this year, still many of us are watching the economic forecasts ahead with a lot of trepidation and caution. Will California continue to invest in its future, or as during the recession of 2007-9, will the gains be just as easily lost when we no longer have record budget surpluses? A second point I wanted to lift and to stress is the importance and really for policymakers to really rethink in some ways the LCAP, or the Local Control and Accountability Plan. While the change in funding to a more local control was meant to create more possibilities for parent and community involvement, too often it lacks student engagement, who are often at the forefront to provide the most critical insights. CBOs, community-based organizations with deep roots in communities, are often shut out of opportunities to engage with schools and students they usually serve, only for districts to too often contract and partner with for-profit educational businesses with limited connections to communities or the schools beyond the terms of their contract. And this is something that I'm hoping policymakers really make note of as they're thinking of really how do we create this equity for all, starting with an equity on the mall. And this can be a key place for policy action. Conversations around social emotional learning and mental health are rife around the state. However, a key question we're all wrestling with is, do the services required actually get to where they're needed? Or far too often, is it just a checkoff for your bureaucrat to provide to someone above them? Equity has to be centered at our school boards and in ways that the resources actually flow to our students. These are going to just be some of the conversations that my colleagues are going to be going into in depth as we talk about and center the crisis around education across the state. My colleagues today are going to touch on a number of these critical issues, some of the most burning in the state. Our friends at the Dolores Huerta Foundation, with their dynamic education policy director, Ashley De La Rosa, will share about the over-policing of students. While many police departments cut back on SROs, student resource officers, due to their staffing shortages, it is often the adults that seek to bring them back when students and children are rarely asked for their input. Following Ashley will be Vianney Barraza from the Educational Leadership Foundation, who will share her unique insights into student needs, as the organization has been a key part of providing important resources for low-income students and families. Following Vianney will be Erica Hockard from the Source LGBT out of Tulare County. Erica will be sharing about the school climate and the communities and cultures that we seek to forge. While other states are seeking to censor and inhibit our students from expressing themselves and being themselves, in California, often our rhetoric is the opposite. But does our deeds match our spirit? Our student bodies and student lives should not be the football fields for adults, and Erica is going to be sharing about rehumanizing our youth. Finally, Harjeet Singh, my colleague at the Jakarta Movement and a trustee for the Sutter County Office of Education, will be sharing his insights and reflections on our educational future in this post-pandemic world. Education is at the interstices of all parts of the iHeal platform. It really tells a story about our investments for the future. What is the California we wish to build? Who are the people we wish to be? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. And I'm very excited to listen to so many different points of views, and really happy to be part of this presentation. To you, go Ashley.
Thank you, Deeb. Hello, everybody. My name is Ashley De La Rosa, Education Policy Director with the Dolores Huerta Foundation. My pronouns are she, her, ella. So just a little bit about the Dolores Huerta Foundation. Our mission is to inspire and organize communities, to build volunteer organizations empowered to pursue social justice. With this, we have an organizing model focused on grassroots advocacy, having neighbors united or Vecinos Unidos, which are a base of volunteers, developing hands-on leadership, and having youth parent community empowerment, with really a focus on civic engagement, education equity, and youth leadership, which all comes integrated when we're talking about leading education equity in the Central Valley. So just to paint a picture of how we started education organizing, in Kern County, there was, just to paint a picture, right? We had a district that up until 2009, one of its schools had a rebel mascot, a Confederate image, in a Black and Latinx high school with street names after Confederate figures across the school. There was a school named Plantation up until 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. There in this school district, there's about 40,000 students, where the demographic of the teachers, 65% of the population are Black and brown students, where 70% of the teachers are white. So we know that there are huge disparities within Kern County, as we see across the Central Valley. And in 2009, 2010, there was a national report that issued that the Kern High School District was expelling and suspending students at a much higher rate in the state, with over 2,500 expulsions and 90 for non-mandatory offenses, where the majority of the students being expelled were Black and brown students. So at this time, there were parents that were also coming to the Dolores Huerta Foundation asking for support, because when they were having notices come to their house, they didn't understand what was going on. There was notices in English when they were Spanish speakers. The hearings were in central Bakersfield when they lived in the rural areas of Kern County. So there was a lot of disparities and a lot of injustices happening around for our parents, right? So we really began organizing with a model of being able to have parents share their stories, coming together to build a collaborative known as the Kern Education Justice Collaborative, with policy and legal strategy, doing some advocacy and education around the budget, the school district budget, and allowing parents to understand that they have a say, thanks to how Deep had mentioned earlier, the local control and accountability plan, and being able to have input as to where they want their dollars spent. And so throughout the years, we have really been focusing on being able to not just use the data, but also uplift the stories that give faces and to the numbers that are being provided. So in 2014, the Dolores Huerta Foundation, along with other non community-based organizations, filed a lawsuit and settled in 2017, which was one of its first and historic kind of settlement, which demanded that the current high school district do an overhaul on their disciplinary practices, implement more positive interventions and behavioral supports, being able to hire and retain more teachers of color, African American teachers, Latinx teachers, and being able to have a change in the culture that we see. So during 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, we know that there's a disparity, right? We know that there is a huge amount of police presence in our schools. I mean, there's 29 officers, 4 substitute officers, dispatchers. The current high school district has one of its own police departments where they have a chief and then they have a lieutenant. So with that, we compare it to what other resources our students have desperately advocated for. We had a survey where the majority of our students asked for mental health services, more nurses on campuses, being able to lead spaces, peer-to-peer learning. So, the numbers themselves are showing that there's an idea of what the school district sees as safety and security, and we have what our youth are also advocating for. So our youth have been leading conversations where they are providing recommendations, asking for nurses. They had a campaign where in Arvin, they were asking for more nurses and counselors, designing yard signs, getting petitions signed, and being able to really advocate for what they need. And so the fight today still is going on. We see that recently with schools going back in person, there's been a lot of trauma and violence coming into our schools that can be really healed through more restorative justice practices, being able to ensure that we're having open dialogues. And although our youth are leading these conversations along with parents, it's not enough. We need school district board members to really take the time to learn about their communities that they're representing, learning about the issues that are at hand and how it affects every community member. We see the data, we hear the stories, and it's all the same. Our Latinx, our African American, our LGBTQ+, our indigenous students are the ones being affected the most by police presence, and it's not causing any safety or security. So our mission is to continue to organize, use a budget to ensure that there's advocacy around that, ensuring that our youth are taking on leadership positions in school site councils, in student leadership, and having these hard conversations. But it shouldn't be up to them solely, and it should be a work in progress that we continue to support. And so with that being said, today, I ask of you all to really take a moment to hear from our youth, to really have an opportunity to voice your concerns as a parent, as a community member, and really demand accountability from the school board members that are passing and adopting policies and practices that are often inequitable, and supporting those who also are supporting the policies and practices that are supporting our students. So, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Vianey Barraza. I am with the Education and Leadership Foundation. Just a brief overview, our mission is to empower the underrepresented communities through immigrant services, equitable education opportunities, and social justice. Today, I will be doing a brief presentation on understanding the services of students' needs, a focus on non-English speaking and the immigrant student experience. One of the primary topics that we want to bring attention to is the need for educator training on politically correct language. Many students that the foundation helps have come to us and express their experience of being subject to demeaning and harsh language, either used by their peers or in some cases their educators to describe themselves, their families, and their communities. At times, the language used is incorrect, is used by mistake, but it still cuts deeply within their learning experience. We want to ensure that teachers and students are educated on the correct terms and language to use with their peers, that the school setting should be a place of safety, understanding the correct language used to refer to the undocumented students and non-English speakers is the first step that we can take. Language sensitivity training and the terms to use to avoid when referring to undocumented students is important. It needs to be implemented at all education levels. We need to bring awareness to the use of derogatory language towards the students. It really does impact their learning experience. We want to provide a positive learning experience where they want to be engaged, where they feel safe in school and they want to be part of that community. We want to prevent discouragement and potential dropouts due to preventable language use. Another factor that we want to focus on is educator training on high-risk students for K-12. High risk refers to minority students, academically disadvantaged, disabled, or low socioeconomic status, many of those categories which apply to undocumented and non-English speaking students. We want to embrace the immigrant students and their culture to give them access to the full school curriculums for these students. We don't want to undervalue English learners. We do not want to limit their progress in their core subjects. Immigrants and non-English speaker students are often overlooked in their education and they suffer for it. They are overpassed for opportunities to join academically challenging courses due to their English learner status. However, educators must not overlook these students. They must recognize that being shy or quiet does not reflect on the student's academic performance ability. Let's give English learners the opportunity to compete on par with their English-speaking peers. Let's give them access to honors or advanced placements in leadership classes. Let themselves be the judge of what their limitations are. Another factor that we want to bring attention to is the parents' understanding of what A3G requirements are. A3G high school course requirements for university admissions are separate from graduation requirements. Many parents do not understand this. They don't understand that not taking A3G courses will result in their students having to attend a community college and then transfer to a four-year institution. There is a need for parents to advocate that their children's classes are helping them become college ready. Many parents that understand are under the impression that by simply attending schools, their children will be ready and prepared for a higher education. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Many students are not taking the core classes needed to be accepted into a four-year university. There is a lack of communication between counselors and the parents, which we find very unfortunate. The parents of non-English speaking undocumented students are the most disinformed. There is a need to bridge this information gap between parents and their children's school. We need live information workshops for parents in their native language to help them understand the needs of their children's education. Parents want to advocate for those children's education. Let's give them the tools so they can do so. We need educational workshops. There needs to be fundings for these. They need to be presented in the parents' native language. Printed pamphlets are not enough to go ahead and share the vital information that is needed for these courses. We need live question and answer sessions to clarify any doubts. If the schools don't have bilingual staff members to make these presentations, we need to bring in translators so that they can have these tough conversations for the betterment of their students. I also want to bring attention to the need of AB 540 trainings for high school counselors. It's an important subject that we have seen at times often overlooked. The high school counselors lack the training on the experience of undocumented students. on what the road of a college readiness is for them. A college education is a dream for many undocumented students, but many are at a loss of what to do to achieve one. There is little information about the aid available for undocumented students for higher education. It's disheartening that when they reach out to their high school counselor, many are left with unclear and often outdated information of what to do. Many undocumented students are left to navigate the road of applying and financing their higher education by themselves. The burden to research and understand the resources available falls on their subject, and many are lost in attempting to understand it. We want to increase the number of undocumented students that are attending college. Having them adequately prepared high school counselors will give them the tools to get there. We want to ensure that all high school counselors are aware of what AB 540 legislation references are for undocumented students in their access to in-state tuition and in-state financial aid. We want them to understand what dream centers are, to have network information, to have points of access to AB 540 support centers. There is a need for continuous training to ensure that high school counselors are up to date on what this information is, to pass it along to this very disadvantaged group of students. And lastly, I want to focus on what is the next step after college graduation for undocumented students. There is a need for undocumented students to get access to work authorizations. Deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, is not an option any longer. It has been rescinded for quite a while. And now we have a new generation of college-educated young professionals without a legal means to get access to any type of work authorization. This forces many to take labor jobs that are unrelated to their degrees. Again, we must focus on what to do with the students after graduation. They are left in limbo. They have achieved their dream of a college education, but now they're at a loss of what to do with their education. A short-term solution to this problem is to provide students with training on how to become independent contractors, to receive training on how to start their own business, on becoming consultants on the field that they trained, to show students that there are licenses available for them to work in their school-related field. Anything that they are interested in. We want to show these college graduates that their education was not wasted, that there is a means for them to go ahead and practice on the field that they have actually chosen to practice in. Again, we ask for a lot more training and information and funding available to go ahead and make non-English households aware of what is the next step for their students' education. Parents, again, are aware that they need to be involved in their students' life. However, the language barrier is something that we have seen is a great difficulty for the immigrant households, for the non-English speaking community. We ask for help to go ahead and get that training for them. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Erica Hawkyard and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm from the Source LGBT Plus Center. There we go. Thank you. So I'm here to speak to you all today about humanizing our LGBTQ plus youth. But before I get started, I do want to say Happy Pride. So anyways, it's the best month of the year for us here at the Source. But let's get started. So to preface my discussion, I do want to let you know that typically the Source, we have been involved in the health policy subcommittee, but the journey that our youth took us on this year led us here. And so I appreciate you all giving us an opportunity to voice our youth's concerns. So the Source LGBT Plus Center is from, we're based in Visalia, California, and we serve rural and suburban communities in Tulare and Kings counties. Our mission is to provide spaces within our communities for the LGBTQ plus people to learn, grow, belong, transform, question, and support. Since 2016, we have engaged our local officials, state legislature, as well as healthcare providers and clinics in policy and systems change. Because of these efforts, our Tulare County Health Department and HHSA are now fully engaged in adopting inclusive practices and procedures for LGBT care at all their clinics. Next slide, please. I am from the youth program, and our youth program serves LGBTQ plus and allied youth ages 12 to 26, which is quite broad. We offer peer support, a drop-in center where kids can come in and hang out from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., youth programs and activities, leadership development, HIV and HVC resources and testing, family support for parents of LGBTQ plus youth, and recovery services. And we also offer support to GSAs and schools that we partner with. One of our flagship programs, which is funded by iHeal, is our Leadership Academy, which I'd like. Thank you. So our Leadership Academy was founded in 2018. Our LGBTQ plus Youth Leadership Academy expands opportunities and leadership development for LGBTQ plus youth. In Leadership Academy, we emphasize social justice, health advocacy, healing, and education advocacy. To the left, you'll see our class of 2022. They just graduated. Our class of 2022 was our most gender diverse class yet, with 75% of our participants identifying as trans and non-binary. And this was the focus of our exploration with this Leadership Academy, was looking at policies that impact the health of trans, non-binary, and gender expansive youth. They are, our most marginalized members of our community. Not only do they face discrimination from, our larger community in Tulare and Kings County, but also within the queer community itself. So identifying policies and practices that protect them was the main thrust of this year's Leadership Academy. Next slide, please. According to the 2017 report by Movement Advancement Project at GLSEN, there's a lot of alphabet soup in this presentation, so try to keep track of the acronyms. I struggle sometimes myself. 75% of trans students felt unsafe at school because of their gender expression. 70% of trans students said that they had avoided bathrooms because they felt unsafe or uncomfortable. 60% of trans students have been required to use a bathroom or a locker room that did not match the gender they live every day. And 50% of trans students were unable to use the name or pronoun that matched their gender. These numbers are grim enough, but when we sat down with our kids in the beginning of March of this year, 2022, the reality seemed much more grim. Due to the pandemic, we haven't been able to get updated numbers. However, we can look at general reports on queer mental health for youth in the pandemic. Next slide, please, to kind of give us context to extrapolate where our youth are at now. Many LGBTQ plus youth were forced back into the closet when we transitioned to virtual learning. In 2021, the National Survey on LGBTQ plus youth mental health paints a clear picture. Trans and gender diverse youth need gender affirming spaces. 42% of LGBTQ plus youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, including more than half of transgender youth and non-binary youth. Over 80% of LGBTQ plus youth stated that COVID-19 made their living situation more stressful. Only 1 in 3 found their home to be LGBTQ plus affirming. 70% of LGBTQ youth stated that their mental health was poor most of the time or always during COVID-19. When our kids were pushed back home for virtual learning, a lot of them were removed from their safety net, the social worker they worked with, the counselor or therapist they worked with. Many of our students were literally making calls to their therapists from inside their closet. They were literally put back into the closet. And when we returned to campus, I think many of our youth were hoping that they could return to being themselves, being their most authentic selves. But when we looked at our area, so that's Tulare and Kings County, a lot of our youth were facing administrations that were emboldened by the previous administration, and basically we're not following policies that are already in place to protect our youth. Next slide, please. So a lot of our kids returned to campus and they were unable to use pronouns, unable to be referred to by their preferred name. And a lot of our students were facing a mental health crisis, and that front line was in our schools. So the biggest thing that we talk to the schools we work with is that gender affirming care and policies are suicide prevention. You are literally saving lives by allowing people to use their pronouns, preferred name, or just simply not rejecting kids. That's what we press on as many schools that we work with as possible. So what can your schools do? What can you do? What can our trustees do? Create safe spaces. LGBTQ youth who have access to spaces that affirm their sexual orientation and gender identity reported lower rates of attempting suicide. And also, as I mentioned before, respecting names and pronouns. Transgender, non-binary youth who are able to change their names and or gender marker on legal documents, such as driver's license and birth certificates, reported lower rates of attempting suicide. Now, when we're looking at queer youth, it doesn't even have to go that far. Being able to update their name and gender marker on roll, like within Aries, whatever your school uses to track attendance on your grade book, all those things make a huge difference in how you are able to protect your queer students on campus. Next slide, please. So I mentioned policy doesn't quite meet up with practice. Laws and policies are in place to protect gender expansive youth in our service area, but they're not correctly implemented, if at all. In many schools and service providers, many basic human needs and acknowledgements that cisgendered people take for granted are denied to queer youth. To the right is a student-organized walkout and protest of a student being harassed and misgendered by a staff member at University Preparatory High School in Visalia this April. This is one of many complaints that were relayed to us by youth in our leadership academy, youth in our regular youth group, or kids who just come up and talk to us when we're out at events, just being visible. We also were reported stories of kids not being able to access a bathroom, kids who were harassed by administration saying things like, I don't agree with your lifestyle, or referring to them as having an alternative lifestyle. So our kids are facing a lot of hostility from the top down right now. And in this case, I also would like to stress that school admin supported the teacher who was misgendering this student. So it is a campus culture problem. Next slide, please. So when we started Leadership Academy, our emphasis, as I mentioned earlier, was gender affirming care is suicide prevention. And in March, our local Planned Parenthood, which is the only service provider in our two counties that provides access to gender affirming care. At the start of Leadership Academy, the permit for their new location was appealed. 2 Leadership Academy alums and 1 current staff member attended the meeting to share their stories about their personal experiences and the need for gender affirming care, and gender affirming care is suicide prevention. So they were able to speak about what their experiences are, what their lived experiences are, and we're really proud of them for voicing that opinion. And like with City Hall, like with our school boards, a lot of the times, like they need to hear from our youth. So being able to provide support for youth to voice their concerns and their lived experiences is a huge piece in changing culture on our campuses. So supporting those youth as they communicate their needs is very important. Next slide, please. We also had the opportunity to partner with Visalia Unified School District over the course of this Leadership Academy. After the Planned Parenthood event, we were invited by VUSD to discuss a Pride proclamation, drafting one with our kids for their campus. I would like to preface this by saying that this was a response to an incident that happened earlier or at the end of the prior year, where the school board made, or a school board member made homophobic comments to a queer staff member. And again, this was an issue highlighting campus or school administration culture that was homophobic. So our Leadership Academy collaborated with them, and the Visalia Unified School District Equity and Student Services Administrator to create a pride resolution for the organization. Before we engaged with them, we wanted to make sure we had a clear discussion about protecting our youth. Basically, Deep mentioned earlier that some admin are more concerned about checking a box, and that's what initially this felt like. So we did have a frank conversation with VUSD outlining our expectations and what we would need for our youth before we brought them into this event. Like, we didn't want our kids to do all of the emotional labor. We wanted the board to draft first. So we talked to our kids after we'd reached that agreement, and then they highlighted 4 primary concerns that they wanted implemented in what would become a resolution instead of a pride proclamation. Bathroom access, protecting gender diverse youth by eliminating barriers to accessing bathrooms across all of the USD and middle and high school campuses pursuant to Ed Code Assembly Bill 1266. Being able to use the bathroom is a human right, and a lot of the times there's only one on a campus that has like 800 kids, or they need a key and they have to go ask the nurse for it, and it's embarrassing. Making sure that our kids are able to access a gender diverse bathroom. Also, cultural competency training for staff, addressing the health and safety of LGBTQ plus individuals by providing LGBTQ cultural competency training to staff, educators, administrators, and school board members, so that they are educated on why, like how to be respectful to queer kids, why it's important, how it's suicide prevention, all those important pieces. Acknowledgement of legal protections for trans youth. Education Code Section 220, which clearly outlines gender, gender identity, and gender expression and sexual orientation as protected classes. We have the policies that protect these kids. They're just not being enacted. So ironing out, listing what those policies are so that they have to acknowledge them. And additionally, data. We wanted to include data from a 2018 report that gender diverse students who are supported by LGBTQ plus affirming policies on school campuses had a 56% drop in suicidal ideation, more than half. So we wanted to outline that their actions could potentially save lives, or would. Next slide, please. So this was a process we went through with our kids. We met with VUSD task forces. We wanted to clearly outline our expectation of the board before bringing Leadership Academy youth into the discussion. The board needed to create the initial draft and commit to enacting some of the youth suggestions. We wanted to make sure that our youth would get something out of this, and they had to commit to doing a certain number of action items from this resolution. Leadership Academy met with VUSD Equity and Student Services Administrator. The administrator met up with our Leadership Academy youth and talked about the process that the board would have to go through to adopt the policy and set realistic expectations. We wanted to make sure that our kids knew like this was a long process, and how this process would play out, and so that they had realistic expectations when they were coming up with their asks. We wanted to make sure this was a positive experience for our youth. And then Leadership Academy reviewed the policy that the policy draft the board had and made recommendations. Youth read through the resolution and had several group discussions and outlined 4 action items for the board. Taking their notes, a staff member then drafted the new resolution, including those action items. As of today, we still have not gotten a finalized resolution. They've been going back and forth. It's a long process, but we've been transparent with our youth through this whole process. Next slide, please. So why did I talk about all this? Well, we want to stress to anyone who's involved in any aspect of education, how they can get engaged to create safe spaces on campus, because this is a long process, and the best way to protect our LGBTQ plus youth, particularly our trans and non-binary youth, is to engage with your local school and school board. Pride Month acknowledgements. Does your campus have one? Many organizations post theirs. Find one you like and tweak it. There's loads of templates online, and it's a really easy thing to do to shine a light on LGBTQ plus youth. Create safe spaces. Many LGBTQ plus youth are only at are only out at school to their friends. Creating spaces where they can be fully themselves saves lives. So they're not going to be out to everyone on campus, but if you're one trustworthy adult, one person that they can confide in, that's huge. Advocate for safe bathrooms for trans and LGBTQ plus youth. How many gender inclusive single stall bathrooms are on your campuses? Do they need a key? Do they have to go to the nurse's office? Find out. Oftentimes there are bathrooms that aren't being utilized that can easily be flipped to a gender inclusive bathroom. Practice pronouns. Normalize introducing yourself with pronouns. Start staff meetings by introducing your pronouns. Be the change. This one is huge. I cannot tell you how many kids light up when I introduce myself with my pronouns and how many kids then share their pronouns for the first time. That's a really easy thing to do that creates safety instantly. Also, celebrate queer joy. Amplify positive stories about queer youth. Share their wins. Tell them how amazing they are. Joy is resistance. And I hope you also enjoyed all the photos of our queer youth shining light on what they did this year. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I hope that you leave this engaged and ready to create safe spaces within your organizations, with your partner schools, and implement these simple changes that have a huge impact on reducing suicide in queer youth. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Harjeet Singh. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm very excited to share about what the future or what education futures can look like. I'll be sharing from my perspective as a director of a nonprofit organization, Jakara Movement, a trustee for the Sutter County Office of Education, and a former K-12 teacher. Today, I'll talk about 3 important issues for the future of education: partnering with community-based organizations, partnering with students, and workforce development. Second slide, please. Thank you. So first, we'll speak about utilizing the expertise of community-based organizations. I serve on the planning committee for California School Board Association's annual education conference that hosts thousands of California school board members every year. As we plan this year's conference and analyze the data to see what resources school districts seek, communicating and building relationships with families and communities comes to the top of the priority list. For some school districts, they would like to have a better understanding of the needs of their students and families. For some school districts, they have many programs that are underutilized because they struggle to communicate with parents. In both cases, communication and relationship building is important. We cannot make progress unless there is a healthy relationship between schools and families. Schools do not need to reinvent the wheel in terms of relationship building and communication. Instead, they can consult with experts in communicating with families and building relationships with community. Who are these experts? Community-based organizations, CBOs, nonprofits, 501c3s, whatever you'd like to call them. These organizations are responsive to the needs of the community, and they adapt as the educational climate changes as well. Community organizations already knew how to build relationships pre-pandemic. Now they have learned how to build relationships through a pandemic as well, virtually and remotely. And that's because this is what CBOs do all the time. Schools have to think about curriculum, assessment, operations, finances, student safety, and dozens of other things before even getting to family and community engagement. Community-based organizations are connecting with students, their parents, and maybe their grandparents all day, every day. And I can say that because having been involved with community organizing, I can say that the work never stops. What I have noticed is that schools and districts rarely leverage the expertise of community-based organizations. Often organizations have to plead with schools to let them engage their students and families. Districts will often give third-party organizations contracts to aid in family engagement. And those third-party orgs are not connected to the community that the district serves. To ameliorate this issue, when districts receive funding, there needs to be a requirement for them to utilize CBOs at the very least to help with student and family engagement. But I can see so much more coming out of that. Community orgs can run after-school programs. They can train teachers to be more culturally responsive to their students. Some organizations can evaluate curricula and make recommendations to create a more equity-focused and inclusive curriculum. There is so much potential if community organizations are brought in as partners. Speaking of partners, how about we build a true partnership with students? Next slide, please. In any relationship, you can't have a true partnership if one side wields all the power. Within our K-12 education system, the primary stakeholders are students, teachers, and parents. A parent can run for school board and be a parent representative on the decision-making council. Teacher unions can endorse a candidate who will be a champion for teachers on the school board. What can students do? Nothing really. Sure, students can elect student representatives that report to the school board and inform them of the issues that affect them. But when it comes down to voting, board members are responsible to all their constituents. The student voice often gets drowned out because students can't vote for school board members via elections. In 2017, the California legislature passed AB 261. This law allows high school students to sit as a board member on a school board and cast a preferential vote that does not determine the outcome of the final vote. While I believe that this is a great first step, I don't think it's the destination. What if we took it further? What if students elected someone to truly represent the student voice, and that person is a full voting member of the local school board? If we truly want students to be civically engaged in local government, their vote has to count, and their voice needs to be heard. Next slide, please. Finally, I'd like to speak briefly about workforce development. This is an important topic because at the end of the day, our students are receiving an education so that they can be a part of the workforce. Some will immediately after high school, others will go to college and work after. Regardless, we have to give students the necessary skills to be successful in the workforce. For students who seek alternative routes to careers, there are many great career and technical education programs available for them. I'm very proud of the CTE programs we have here at Sutter County, from culinary arts to various medical assistant programs. These programs are great and they serve so many students, and they should continue to receive funding. In addition to that, I'd like to talk about the future of workforce development in relation to computer science. Computer science education is critical for all students in California. Right now, only 3% of high school students are enrolled in computer science classes. Why is that significant? California leads the nation in the size of its tech workforce, adding 50,000 new tech jobs last year alone. However, the state is currently unable to meet the growing demand for a skilled and diverse technology workforce, threatening our economic growth, competitiveness, innovation, and equity. No matter what jobs our students will be performing in 10 to 20 years, they will need some level of computer literacy. Students should have access to CS classes regardless of the zip code they live in if they want to remain competitive in the rapidly changing workforce. Last slide, please. So in conclusion, there is a lot for us to just not think about, but take action on, from creating partnerships with community-based organizations and students to providing equitable access for computer science education for all California students. Let's work together to create educational equity for our students. Thank you.
Thanks, Harjeet. Thank you for the Education Subcommittee for the wonderful presentation. We have some time and we'd love to ask a couple of questions that you all may help us answer in this space right now. So, at the top, Deepak talked about the surplus that we have in California, right? And the governor has talked about a record surplus that we've seen in California. If each of you could think about, where do you all see, or where do students think about where those dollars should be going, right? Based on your presentations today. We can start with Ashley, and then we'll go Harjeet, and then Erica.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many of our students and community members have expressed the need for wellness and restorative justice, having a center to be able to go to whenever these issues arise. A lot of these issues are preventative, right? Measures to ensure that we stray away from the harsh discipline practices. So I would say investment or put dollars in wellness, whether it be wellness centers, more focus on school counselors, creating a pipeline to ensure that there are the necessary counselors in school districts, especially in the rural areas. And then also making sure that there's therapists, our school psychologists.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. Harjeet?
Yeah, I can just, I'd love to add on to what Ashley mentioned. Mental health wellness is just key priority for many of our students. And if we think about the numbers in schools, there might be one counselor who's responsible for hundreds of students and overseeing them. And that's just an impossible expectation to have for one person to be able to truly think about the well-being of our students. And so, bringing in more mental health resources. We dedicate so much to the academic health and well-being of our students, but as our students go to school, that's just one aspect of their growth and development. So I would definitely plus 1 million to more resources for mental health.
Great. Thank you, Erica.
I mean, I'm going to say the same. We're in a crisis right now, and especially when we look at our younger youth, right? A lot of people over the age of 6, a lot of our youth do have anxiety, do experience depression. It just can't be diagnosed. And so we'll have, at least in our service area, we'll have one school social worker or therapist who's then servicing 4 schools. So each school only has 0.25 of a licensed professional who can offer on-site support. Also, cultural competency training for all of those individuals, especially when we're looking at demographics, right? Like a lot of our school counselors, at least in our service area, are white cis women. And they need to have the training to adequately address the needs of our youth, of our BIPOC youth, of our queer youth, of our ESL speakers, so that they are getting all of the support, not just a part of it.
Great, thank you. Vianney, I'll ask that question to you as well. We talked about the surplus. Are there ways that you all see, or your students you work with see, that extra dollars should be put into their schools, and for what use?
Again, the need for more counselors, and also the need to have some type of translating services. A lot of the people that we serve, the students end up translating for their parents. And again, some of the language is lost there. They don't know the correct educational terms to use to translate correctly. And it shouldn't be on the students' shoulders to be able to translate the services for their parents. They are there for the help, they need the support. So we need more bilingual staff, and we need more counselors and more training. I believe that is where the surplus should go to some extent.
Great, thank you. To some extent, all of you have talked about the importance of engaging students, but also their families in the schools and also in school board decision making. Can you all speak to what your organization is doing in that space, and also maybe shed light on some, what types of trainings are needed to support students and parents to engage in that in that decision making process? And I'll kick it off with Harjeet. You can start with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what Jakara movement is doing is we're very much focused on civic engagement. And so students who are involved in any of our programs, they're actually required to attend at least one school board meeting a year to be engaged with the organization. And so they attend these meetings, and then we have to prep them quite a bit before the meeting just to go through the agenda, to know what the flow of the meeting is going to be like. And also we encourage students to speak at meetings as well. And like a big push that we had done was during redistricting. So redistricting has been happening, through different levels of government. But students are more interested in schools and their school board. And so, advocating for, specific communities of interest and prepping students to do that. And I think in terms of engaging with school board, it's difficult because just knowing how to read the agenda, knowing like what's going to be covered, knowing how to give a public comment, knowing when to do all these things. I think there's a big gap in what happens and what we actually know as community members. So those trainings are necessary. But then I think a big part of it also falls on the school district and the school board in terms of when are they holding their meetings? Are the meetings at a time that's accessible for families and students? If a meeting is at 5 p.m., how do you expect a parent to get off of work and go to a meeting? And if it's too late at night, how do you expect a student to be able to stay at a meeting? So that the location of it, and also just the outreach that they're doing. I know many school boards, the outreach is, well, we posted our agenda online and no one showed up to this meeting. Why didn't anyone show up? How are you outreaching to people and encouraging them to come?
Great, thanks. Erica, anything to add to that?
We always try to send someone with our youth when they are attending school board or like city hall meetings, because it's really helpful for them to have someone there to support them, because it's scary getting up. And then like with Harjeet, like we also we have them like hang out for a bit, have pizza, talk about like what the meeting's like. Additionally too, like in terms of offering support for parents going through this process, though, is being an advocate with the parent as well, especially when we're dealing with, like, let's say, a student has experienced like discrimination or something like that, and it's really stressful for the parent to navigate these processes, especially when you're dealing with an outed child on a school campus, right? Going to a school board meeting to air your grievances is exacerbating the problem. It is shining a light, putting that kid under a microscope, which is the opposite of what should be done to protect the child in this case, right? You want to restore their safety, their security. So in those cases, we actually, we will take like a group of people, like, to like go and support, to talk generally about the policy, but then we usually encourage the parents to do like a one-on-one meeting instead, so that this one youth isn't put under the spotlight. So when we're looking at like advocating for queer youth, like you do have that like visibility issue. And we always always tell the parents, keep checking in. They may say like, I'm gung-ho, mom, let's go to the school board meeting, and then the reality hits. And additionally too, like, make sure that you're checking in. Is you don't know what kind of bullying they're experiencing virtually from their classmates, from strangers who are adults who should know better, commenting on the Facebook feed if the school board meeting streamed live. So the other thing we stress is keep checking on your kid, keep checking in that they're okay, make sure that they're getting the mental health support that they need.
Great. VNA, anything to add to that?
At the Education Leadership Foundation, we have something called Parent University that focuses on teaching the importance of being involved in your child's school life, not only like the first 5 all the way to college readiness. So it's a group of mostly mothers that get together, they take these courses, and if they have grievances, they get together and they actually are very active about going to the school site. So I haven't seen go to the school board level yet. So they, again, address the problem more locally.
Great. And then Ashley, anything to add or to close out this segment?
Yeah, so what the Dolores Huerta Foundation is doing is we're developing the community's understanding of movement building. You know, as I painted the picture earlier, our work started in 2009 and has been continuously going for all these years, right? It's a movement that regardless of policy, we can't get rid of the harms of the educational system until we address the root cause, which oftentimes is systemic racism and oppressive systems that exist in our schools. And so, you know, just as we mentioned earlier with the pandemic, we've highlighted so many already existing disparities. And so being able to really uplift the stories of our communities, advocate for change, and strive for education equity. You know, we heard the term community a lot. And so being mindful of where all the communities are coming from, you know, looking at the data, who are the students being suspended and expelled? Why are they being expelled? Looking at the parents that are not showing up, right? What reach are you going to take in order to ensure that they are coming? You know, many of the times they don't have access to the web. They don't have access to even some higher advanced telephones. So why don't we continue to send mail and ensure that we're doing all our efforts in order to engage all of the communities? And, you know, I really do think that in order to address education equity, we also need to be involved civically, have civic engagement, teach our students, our parents about their opportunities, about their rights, being able to learn about the school board, how they run, right? What are their processes? What are their responsibilities? So when issues do arise, they know exactly who to go to. Community members know who to go to, and be able to be engaged. And more so, you know, it's just building on this solidarity, this sense of community to ensure that we are addressing the issues and we are being intentional about working together to adopt equitable policies and close the gaps. So that's all I'll have to share.
Great. Thank you very much. So we are at time, and we just want to thank you all for sharing the wonderful work that you all are doing, for uplifting the voices of students and parents in your communities, and for sharing the work that you all have been doing across the San Joaquin Valley. So thank you again, the Education Committee, for that work.